Good morning. Good to see everybody this morning. We're nearing the end. Interesting that marriage. So he is so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, let's also love the church. We started on this a little bit last week, but I want to remind you that and I wouldn't do this under every circumstance, but if a fella who I knew well and his wife came into my office and I said, "What's the problem?" and he said, "Well, I just don't love her anymore," I would immediately say, "Then you've acknowledged that you're in sin. You're sinning because you're commanded to love her." Now, what does he mean? What do we usually mean in this society when we say, "I don't love her anymore"? I mean, what we mean is, kind of that love boat kind of love. Okay, and maybe you're not old enough to know what I'm talking about, but the idea there is, fireworks go off and bells ring and all kinds of things. That really, when you look at the original, probably eros. Uh, Erotic comes moved by what she does, that he says, "I'll give you whatever you want up to half of my kingdom." I think that may be erotic. Now, I can't guarantee it, but that's my suspicion. The next word that is used for love in the New Testament is storge. Now, eros is eros. If you're putting it in English, storge is storge. The E is a long A sound. Anyway, that's the way to remember that. But storge is it's fleshly love. But let me explain. What I mean is the love of a parent for a child, and especially the love of a mother for her child. Storge. Now, significantly, that word is never used in the New Testament in the affirmative. It is only used in the negative. So in Romans chapter 1, when you read along and you discover that the Gentiles, as they made their downward spiral into sin, that the Gentiles were without natural affection. There you go. There's your word being used. It's used another time in Paul's writings to Timothy, and in both cases, it's talking about exactly what I've just described. They don't have what they ought to have. Now, in our society, I have a little bit of concern that the number of abortions in this country suggests that we have a lot of women that are without natural affection. You don't love your own flesh, and watch the way the world functions. They'll intentionally modify the language to try to diffuse your thinking on it. And here's what I'm talking about. They won't say you're aborting a child. They'll say you're aborting a fetus, and they describe that as a lump of flesh. Well, it is a lump of flesh, but uh, brothers and sisters, everybody in this audience today is a lump of flesh. And I don't think we consider it okay to just walk up and, stab somebody in the heart and let them die. I don't think that would be acceptable. And I don't believe it is acceptable for the baby either. Now, I'm not trying to get political. I have found people on both sides. In fact, you normally would probably think Democrat, but Lisa Murkowski is a Republican senator from the state of Alaska, and she is strongly in favor of abortion. So it doesn't know sides, okay? It's born out of a false concept. And it's interesting, when Effelgard Smith wrote a book about it, he titled the book "When Choice Becomes God," and that's what's happened. Is that we want to suggest that, well, you can do this because it's your choice, and the woman talked. Absolutely, that's how she got choice. But she had the choice. Now I don't think she has one. But okay, that's all. That's all of that. Okay, I'm going to leave it alone. But that's storge. The next word is phileo. Phileo is the description of emotional love. It is brotherly love, and so Philadelphia comes out of that word, philos. It is the idea there. And the thing about philos is that it is emotion driven. And when you're talking about philos, today you can have it and tomorrow you don't. It kind of depends on the humor you're in. If you're having a really bad day, you may not have any philos, for anything. Okay, so that's important. But agape is a love of devotion, and it means I'm committed to the best interests of the object of my love. No matter what the circumstances are, I'm going to do the best for them. And it's interesting that Paul says that's a command. This is not optional. It is a command. And if we're struggling with loving our mate, whether it be male or female, I suggest to each of us that we need to work on ourselves. That the problem there is me, not my mate. Now, does my mate need work? Look, in a marriage, I'm going to tell you, I'll guarantee you something. My daddy counseled for years. When I was growing up, most Christians had to use a preacher for a counselor because they couldn't afford one. Nobody could afford one, so they went to the preacher. So I've know that he counseled for years, and when I started to go into preaching, he said, "Now, Gary, rule of thumb: if they come and sit in front of you, just always think this: half a dozen of one, six of the other." It's both people play a role in any problem. You can just about guarantee it, and so let's contemplate that and realize that yes, each of us needs to work on giving. Do not go into marriage thinking it's a 50-50 proposition. It is not. It is a 100-100 proposition. If you give 100%, and your mate gives 100%. See, I'd say my wife because I have a wife, but if your mate gives 100%, then the marriage is going to succeed. But if either of you chooses not to give 100%, it might fail. It depends on the strength of the one that has 100% love, if there is such a thing that goes on there. So this intellectual commitment to the best interest of the other. He goes on. By the way, and illustrates that by saying, as Christ loved the church. You talk about being dedicated to the best interests of the object of your love. The church, first of all, is not in existence, but secondly, it would be all sinners at that point in time. Without the blood of Christ, they could not be set free from their sin. Nobody could be, not really and truly. And so Jesus died in advance, so to speak, of his engagement to, his betrothal to the church, and it's a beautiful, beautiful idea. If a man has that kind of love for his wife, generally speaking, I don't find that the woman will have trouble submitting to him, because he's not going to ask her to do anything that is not in her best interest. At least he thinks it's in her best interest. So that's going to be what will happen. So he goes on, verse 26, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. Why? Jesus died that he might sanctify the church. The word that is used there is an interesting word. First of all, we're thinking about he the word that he uses, though, also describes actually be made. God is holy. The bride. And so why did he go to the cross? So that his bride could be holy, so that she could be set good. Notice, how does he end up from born again, born of? Because notice here he's holy, holy. And that's why I would tie this verse in with the John 3 passage, and I would want them to consider that and have to deal with the contrast there. Uh, Truthfully, uh, what we have here is two funerals and one wedding. Okay, two funerals. One died of self, put away selfishness. And then number two, die to sin. Okay. Then the wedding, well, that's of course with Christ. So two funerals and a wedding. No, I'm not making a movie, but I thought that was an interesting concept. All right, so let's pick up at verse 28 then. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. So think about this for a moment as we come along and see that the idea that is here is that I love a husband loves his wife as his own body. Would you intentionally hurt yourself? Not most people. That, by the way, that's actually a psychological problem. If you want constantly want to hurt yourself, and there are young people in particular that will cut themselves and things like that. That is not considered to be psychologically sound or healthy to do that. Well, if I love my wife like Christ loved the church, then guess what? I'm going to do everything I can do not to hurt her. Now, occasionally you're going to make a mistake, and we will hurt each other. We don't do it on purpose, but we will do that. Uh, then he goes on, verse 30, for we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. All right, back up to verse 30, and notice what he says about the church. We're members of his body, of his flesh, of his bones. And the way he then begins to describe that or explain that, and this is what I'm talking about. This passage is really using marriage to explain our relationship to Christ. We usually now flip it and use it the other way because we don't have a good enough concept of marriage. But he quotes from what verse? Where did he get that verse? Anybody know? What time do you all wake up in this class? What verse did he quote? Where's it from? Okay, Genesis chapter 2. Exactly. Is where that comes from. And the two are made, become one flesh. And that he's using that as a description of what happens in the church. So we become one with Christ. Now, I want you to think about an incident in Acts chapter 9. Remember the he's taking prisoner Christians and carrying them back to Jerusalem to be dealt with. And on that road, you remember what happened. About noon, a bright light shone down round about him, and Saul heard a voice from heaven, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? When we take this verse here, where it talks about we become one flesh and bone with Christ, in other words, we become one body with Christ. When we take that into account, then all of a sudden, what do we see? Well, we see very clearly uh, this idea that we are Christ. We're part of Christ. And if you hurt the body, so I'm going to be very, very careful. Brethren, it's my thinking we that's I think not so nice about somebody if I just thought they're part of Christ. Do they have their problems? Yes, but if you do, you want to contend you don't have any. I'm going to contend you don't have any. I'm not going to make that contention. Church is to Christ what a wife is to her husband. That's the mystery. And I keep saying, I've said it now, I guess this will be the third time, but this chapter assumes you understand marriage. It assumes that you understand that relationship. And then on the basis of that knowledge, that you'll understand then the relationship between Christ and the church. And it's a beautiful, beautiful idea. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. I am fascinated by the use that Paul has more than once here of own, OWN. Uh, I does not. I'm not to love just any wife. I'm to love my own wife. Don't you think that's important? I think it is. You know, and same would be true in the church. I'm not to love just any church or any savior. I'm to love Christ. See, that's the way it is. All right, any questions on this section? Because he's going to go from talking about husbands and wives relationship. He's next going to talk about parent-child. Anybody? Oh, I'm doing a great job today. Nobody has a thought, so we're in good shape. No questions. Okay, look at chapter 6, verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Uh, Literally translated, again, this is one of those active verbs. Literally translated is children, keep on obeying your parents. Not just obey them once, but which would be an aorist tense, but instead, present tense, just keep on doing it. It's a constant. Uh, it's an ongoing process. Now, notice, obey your parents where? In the Lord. What does that mean, in the Lord? Well, to the best of my understanding, in the Lord means in accord with the Lord's will. I don't believe that, especially a Christian young person who's still living at home, that if their parents say don't go to worship, I don't believe that the child has to obey that. You may disagree with me, but in the Lord, would be under his authority, and that would violate his authority, for that command to go out. Now, I'm thankful to say, for the most part, I don't know parents that would do that. And usually, the parents I've ever heard about doing it were not Christians. They were unbelievers. And that's why they would make that statement. But the child is to obey, but only in the Lord. And that's significant, I think. They then could refuse to obey if whatever obedience would violate the this command, if you were, be a violation of God's will. Look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. That is the chapter where you see the Ten Commandments delivered. And particularly, we want to notice what it says directed uh, toward children. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Please notice that this is a typical covenant with God, and that is, it has a promise and conditions. The condition is you are to honor your father and mother. The promise is that they may be well with you, may live long on the earth. Now, please understand that that's not a guarantee that the child is not going to get an automobile accident or whatever, not going to get an illness and die. It isn't that. The point is that when you learn to respect authority at home, you're more likely to have a good relationship with authority on earth. That young man or young woman that's been taught to be respectful of authority is not generally going to challenge a policeman, for example. They're going to yield to it. And thus, they will live well and they'll live long, generally speaking. It's kind of a proverb in a sense of the word, but it is a great promise. So then he goes on with that promise. Honor your father and your mother. That is the Exodus 20, verse 12, which is the first commandment with promise. If you read the Ten Commandments, this is the first one that has a promise associated with it. That it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth, is the promise that is there. So if I want to live long on the earth as a child to my parents, I'm respectful and I honor them, I respect them. And then he says, and you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Okay, what provokes people to wrath? Disrespect. Okay, so if a parent disrespects the child, they may provoke them to anger, to wrath. They could. Yeah. Look, the child needs to respect as well. We understand that. We've already talked about that. But if the parent is disrespectful of the child, that could provoke to wrath. What else? I'm going to say inconsistency. And I've warned young parents many times. If a child does something when they're very small and you laugh at it, be prepared for them to do it when they get bigger. See, when they're small, if they start, if they slap mama and everybody in the room laughs, be prepared. If you don't do something about it when they're small, when they get bigger, they're still going to think it's funny. That's what we've trained them to do. So be careful about that. Be consistent is the idea. And I think we got to watch that in terms of don't let your child do something at a young age that when they get older, you're not going to let them do. You got to be consistent. But there's consistency in another way. What about this? when I tell the child don't do something, but I do it all the time. That would tend to get me angry. I will be honest with you. When I see a policeman, violating the speed limit without his lights on, uh, that gets my ire just a little bit. You know, what gives him the right to now? He may be supposed to go on a call without the lights, and I always have to just assume that to calm myself down. Well, he may be on a call. He may be. But if you're going to be in authority, you need to respect the authority yourself. That's the point. And children will pick up on that. They're real quick to pick up on it. Sometimes they'll say uh, something about you can't do that, Dad, but because remember you said so and so. Well, yeah, I didn't I? That was in reference to you. That didn't go for me. Is that what we're going to say? I think that's going to get trouble. So I think those things could be involved. Instead of that, bring them up in the training and admonition. That's New King James there that talks about it. Uh, Training is vitally important in a child's youth. You got to show them. You got to show them how it is done. Training is not just saying it; it's demonstrating it, being an example. And then, of course, the admonition is an interesting word. As we look at it's discipline, really. And it reminds us of Hebrews chapter 12, beginning verse 5, where he talks about discipline of children in particular, and then applies it over to the church. So let's see if we can find that quickly. Hebrews 12. We're going to pick up at verse 5 there. And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you're rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? If you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now, no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Parents that do not discipline do not really love their children. I will say that without any fear of contradiction, not successful contradiction. You may say that's not right. I said, well, then you got an argument with inspiration. You don't have an argument with me. No. Undisciplined children are not loved. And I can give you illustrations that are real easy for us to understand. If you live on a busy street and you tell your child, don't ride your tricycle into the street, you may spank them if they ride into the street. Is that because you don't love them? No, it's far from that. I love them. I don't want them to get hurt by riding out there and some speeding car come by and kill them, or hurt them badly. So discipline is an act of love, and I think we've forgotten that in the church. Because the church has a responsibility to discipline as well. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 is probably the most thoroughgoing explanation of one situation where a young man was having relations with his father's wife. Don't know if it was his mother or if it was his stepmother. We don't have any way to know that. But in either case, it would be wrong for him to do that. And Paul is disturbed by the fact that the church has done nothing about it. that the church has tolerated it. And he directs them. He literally commands them to discipline. Why? Because we're trying to save the soul of that young man. That's why. And it's interesting that you get to 2 Corinthians, guess what? It worked. It worked. They disciplined, it worked. The young man came home to the church. He repented. And Paul in that letter is saying, now take him back. He's done what you want him to do. Take him back. Love him. Care for him is the idea. So discipline is an act of love, whether it's in the family or it is in the church. Either one. All right, verse 5. Bond servants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart as to Christ. Okay, let's talk a minute about, did Paul or God approve of slavery? And the answer to that is no. They did not approve of it. But it was an institution that existed at that particular point in time. So what they did, God and Paul, particularly here, they legislated in a way that was designed to ultimately bring slavery to an end. See, because he doesn't just give instructions to the slave, he gives instructions to the master. And when you begin to put all those instructions together, you can see he's teaching every Christian to have full respect for every other Christian. That's what he's doing. And what's the result? The result is that ultimately you'll see the end of slavery. It happens over and over again. If Christian principles are applied, you'll see the end of it. That's what I hope that we will see. So, bond servants, literally translated, probably better to say slaves, because that's really what he's talking about. Slaves, and notice what he says: be obedient to those who are your masters. The word obedient here is hupakuo, and hupakuo, hupa is under, and akuo is here. Here, H-E-A-R, here. So think about that for just a moment. When we talk about this auditorium, we'll talk about the acoustics. How does it do? And by the way, okay, this is my soapbox for the day for the church, okay? In general, if you sit under that overhang, you're not getting the full benefit of the singing. In general. Why? Because that deadens your sound. And I know that for a fact. Because at the end, toward the end, when the elder says, okay, we're going to stand for the closing song and prayer, I'll go back there to get ready to shake hands, and I can't hear you all sing when I'm underneath there. It isolates me. So I know there are reasons some need to sit back there. I'm not making a law where God made no law. I'm just saying, if you really want to enjoy the full blessings of being together, get out from under that overhang. You'll like it a lot better. I promise you. Singing is better when you do that. Okay, but hupakuo, acoustics, hear. Put your hearing under them. So when they give an instruction, you do it. Why? Because you're putting your hearing under them. You're doing what they say. That's what Paul directs. They were to serve their master sincerely with no hidden motives. Notice, in sincerity of heart. How can you do that, Paul? Because you're doing it for Christ. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. I want you to answer this question in your mind. Does anybody here have a boss at work that is painful to work with? Yeah, don't answer. I don't need the answers. I don't need the trouble that's going to come out of that. I have talked to many people that were miserable at work because of such a boss. Boss that's just very, very difficult to get along with. Here's the way, if you're going to keep the job, the way to continue there is to think, I'm not serving that boss, I'm serving Christ. That's who I'm working for. I'm working for the Lord. And that's what Paul says. I don't, the master may not be what he ought to be. Oh, that's clear. But you treat him like he's Christ. Now, again, I want to go back and tell you that's the, as it were, the seed that's going to bring about the destruction of slavery. That very thing. Because they're going to see how you act and react. They're going to know something's different about you. You're not like all the other slaves when you're a Christian. You're respectful and you listen to me, whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it. See, that's all present. So I believe that's the seed to the destruction of slavery, ultimately. Verse 6, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. What is eye service? It's make it look good on the surface. That's what it is. Some of you, won't be many, because honestly, the only way I can find is go on YouTube and see some. But some of you will know what I'm saying when I talk about Fibber McGee's closet. Fibber McGee was a character years ago in a program, like a television program. And the way that they made everything look straight is they just crammed it all in this closet. If you ever open the door, here it came. I mean, it all just gushed out into the room. Okay. That is eye service. Make it look good. How do you do it? How do you do it around your house? Well, I can tell you how we do it. If surprise company comes, we close all the bedroom doors. Now you don't know whether we made the bed or we didn't make the bed. See, or whatever. That we've covered all that up. That's eye service. Now you can do that at work too. You can make it look good on the surface, but is it good? Is it what it ought to be? See, that Paul said, don't be eye servants, but instead realize that you're the slave of Christ. And again, we're working for Christ. We're working for God. We're doing the will of God in everything that we do. And I'm cross-applying this slave-master relationship. I'm cross-applying that to the relationship of an employer and an employee. That's what I do with that, because that's more nearly what we're going to experience. At least that's what I experience. All right, 7 and 8. With goodwill, doing service as to the Lord and not to men. Now, just in case we missed it before, Paul re-emphasizes it. You serve the Lord. That's who you're serving. That's who you're trying to please, not your master. Instead, you're trying to please the Lord. Knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. Now you start seeing the other side. See, the master has got to treat the slave like he thinks Christ would. And so it's no surprise then that you get to the book of Philemon, which is written to a Christian who apparently had a fair amount of money. And he certainly owned at least one slave. His name was Onesimus. And interestingly enough, the name Onesimus means profitable. Well, he wasn't very profitable because he ran away, to be honest about it. But when he ran, he found Paul. And we're going to talk more when we get to the book of Philemon, but he obeyed the gospel. And Paul writes to Philemon and urges him, said, first of all, I'll pay any debts he owes you. If he owes you something when he left, I'll take care of it. And secondly, he rejoices in the idea that this is now your brother. This fellow that's working for you is part of the family of God. You're related to each other in Christ. And that's the way, again, that we're going to kill, if you would, slavery. It's going to come to an end that way. Verse 9, and you masters, Do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven and that there's no partiality with him. You see, in the previous verse, notice he said, you're going to get what you give. If you give your best, the Lord's going to give you the best. If you're a Christian, of course. And here now he tells the master the same thing. You got to realize that you're under Christ, and you got to treat people like you think Christ would treat them. And is there any case in the New Testament where Jesus spoke ill or in a harsh way to any slave? I don't think you're going to find it. I've never found it. Now, did he deal with slaves? Yes. At the feast, you may remember, wedding feast at Cana, John chapter 2. His mother told the slaves, you do whatever he says. And then he very kindly says, go fill those water pots. Of course, they ends up being filled with wine. He miraculously transforms it. But I find him respectful of everybody, really. And we need to be that way as well, whether we be the boss or we be the employee. Okay, next week, Lord willing, we will finish chapter 6 of Ephesians. If we happen to get all the way through that, we might start into Philippians.